Welcome to Behind the Smiles podcast, where we go beyond the surface while talking to labs and DSOs about everything your highlight reel doesn't show. If you're into stories, strategy, and a little bit of startup chaos, this one is for you. Welcome, everyone, to another new episode of Behind the Smiles podcast. Today, I have with us a very special guest who is a very well-known figure within the dentistry circles. I have Andy Sloan. Andy is the managing director for Agilio Dental. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. It's a pleasure to speak to you this morning, Nipun.
Thanks, Andy. Andy, why don't you take a few minutes to explain, give an introduction about yourself, what your role is within Agilio, and what does Agilio do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, Andy Sloan. I'm the managing director of Agilio Dental. So we're a sectorized software business and I lead the dental sector. What we do is we fundamentally exist to transform the middle office within dental practices and groups. So everything that sits outside of a PMS and outside of a financial system and ERP, we have created a solution that can improve that middle segment. So compliance, workforce management, data connectivity and learning, personal development, bringing that all together in a connected way. I found that through my experience in dentistry, that it's the middle office that's largely left out when people are planning operational structures. So Agilio exists to answer that question.
Brilliant. Great. Thanks, Andy. So, Andy, if we start from a, let's say, 30,000 feet view of what dentistry is or where dentistry is right now, can you give a brief overview of what is the state of dentistry in UK or in general? So if you start with where dentistry is in general, and then we'll go into the connectedness of dentistry and the fragmentation of different softwares that exist today.
Absolutely. And I don't think I'm going to say anything transformational. When I talk about dentistry, it's quite widely known that there's a lot going on. We've got workforce pressures, we've got dental deserts that have appeared in the country where you can't see a clinician, and oral health is suffering as a result of access to dentistry. You've got groups that are starting to grow again. So they slowed down for a period there, but it seems to be that they've started to acquire and want to build their structure more. But you've just got a lot more entrepreneurialism in the dental market right now. And I think that's where I can feel. You've got more associates that want to buy out principals rather than the principal just sell into a corporate. And you've got small groups being established where entrepreneurial dentists are trying to connect practices and strategies together to do more. And I think it's a really exciting time. I've been in dentistry for a very long time now, more years than I care to admit. And I think this is the most excited I've been about our sector, just because we're on the cusp of stuff. And that stuff is plentiful. Digital transformation, access, to dentistry, the way that dentistry is delivered in the UK and being more aligned with other Europe. I can feel all this stuff that's coming together. And I think that it's going to culminate in a significant event very soon that's really, really going to push dentistry forward. So I'm really, really happy to be a part of it.
And I think because you touched on the new kind of smaller micro DSOs or dental groups, if you can call them that, out of curiosity, how is the mindset of a founder or a dent associate who starts a practice when they acquire multiple, let's say 3 or 4 practices, the mindset of that person versus a mindset of someone who has 50 practices? Again, comparing that with someone who has 500 practices. So can you walk us through?
Yeah, and it's a very good question. So I've spoke to founders and operators of all sizes. I come from DSOs myself, sitting on the board of Portman and Portman Dentex, so one of the largest, and then working with these small groups as well. The mindset when you're a small group is that you want to establish, and you're probably in the mindset that you're still a provider, you're a performer yourself. You're still in that business and delivering profit yourself. Whilst worrying, I say this to a lot of people, you're going to spend more time with a dental chair as a clinician than you will do your husband or your wife. And so you've got to at least enjoy it. And you've got to spend the majority of the time with your hands in someone's mouth. So you've got to really enjoy it. But whilst you're doing that, whilst you're being this performer in a small group, you're also worrying about, has the receptionist in another site turned up? Will everybody get paid on time today? Will the CQC phone and say, you've got an inspection next week. So whilst you're actually trying to deliver great patient outcomes yourself clinically, you're worrying about everything else that's going on in that small group because you don't yet have the foundations to take away that pain and challenge. You have to be the chief cook and bottle washer. You've got to have your finger on the pulse across the whole of your small group. And I think that mindset is interesting because I think personally, if it was me, I would probably burn out by trying to deliver the performance. And, if you look at the data of these small groups and even independent practices, where you have an owner operator within them, they tend to be the most profitable in that business. And all the other associates tend to either break even or become slightly unprofitable because the passion is with the owner. They're not just getting a wage check. They're trying to build something for their future. So that's a very, very, it could be a very strained situation that they're in, but still very entrepreneurial and passionate about what it is that they want to structure. And so I really like that end of dentistry just because it's really varied. And I think that's where a lot of help can be given, to these guys to really put in some operational foundations to make just a little bit easier and take that pressure off them so they can focus on revenue growth. When you go to the 50, the mindset shifted. So, and I've spoke to a couple of founders that have surpassed the 50 mark. And I think the one thing that resonates with me is that they feel that they're a little bit less connected to everything that goes on in the group. So you don't know whether Andy Sloan's a problem in your practice or, you've got to rely on others. And it's where you start to need a little bit more data to make decisions, because when you're in this small mindset, you tend to make these decisions on feeling and emotion. But when you get to the 50, if you've not got that connected part of it anymore in the same way, you're going to need some data to make a decision. Otherwise, you run the risk of making the wrong decision. And then you've got things like, do I need more financing? Am I going to look to continue to grow the group? You get interest from suppliers, because all of a sudden you're 50 sites, and that's quite a nice target, for someone to have on their books. You're a little bit more CEO like, and not connected, so not a performer anymore. It's when you have to kind of hang up your dental tools and become a business owner rather than a clinician first. And then you go to the 500, and you don't see many clinicians at that running the 500 side. And I think that's the kind of key. When you get to that 500 side, you're private equity backed. No, I don't think there's any groups other than Bupa, sorry, that are not private equity backed, and you're there to deliver performance. I think that the mindset at that end is quite interesting because they're not always clinically focused, or they're not from a clinical background, I should say. They're there to deliver numbers to shareholders. Does that mean that patient outcomes suffer? And that's a really big debate. I think largely they don't, because there's clinicians actually delivering the dentistry, but it's the strategy. If that's not still focused on patient outcomes first, it could have a very detrimental effect on that group, So yeah, very distinct mindsets. I think that small, clinically focused, medium, still clinically focused. When you get to large, clinically focused by the clinical side of the business, but the strategy is generally set by people who have come from outside dentistry.
Yeah,
did that answer the question?
That did. And I think that's very interesting to see, how a passion, like for a dentist who is passionate about starting their own practice, acquire multiple practice, then they go into that CEO role. So that's another hat that they're wearing. And then they are still the CEO, but they're answerable to the private equity or some sort of, you have someone to answer to as well. So it kind of yings and yangs from being an operator, an owner to again an owner, but you're still answerable to your shareholders at the end of the day. And I think Andy, you mentioned about the connectedness and where the value of the data comes in. So if you dig deep into that, in terms of the connectedness, so be it a 5 clinic practice, be it a 50 or a 500, those, as you scale, you acquire more softwares, more systems, more workflows. and the question about how connected your different practices and the business is, so that you can take the right decision at the right time, because now you're not connected day to day to your patients or to your ground staff. So can you talk about the connectedness nature of, the industry or the groups or practices in general, how fragmented it is today, and does being not connected hurts you in the long run as you scale from 5 to 50 to 500?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, do you know, in terms of dentistry overall, the question I took from that is how connected is dentistry?
Yeah.
So, do you know, in practice, dentistry is not very connected. It's very digital, but it's not very connected. We've adopted a lot of technology, but we haven't really connected that in a single way of working. Do you know, so most clinics are running on a collection of excellent tools, really excellent tools that don't share much context with each other. So whilst the data exists everywhere, and I think there's more data than we've ever had. Do you know, the solutions that are coming out, and I've been meeting with a couple of guys over the last week to surface data, it's fantastic. But unless it's connected, it's isolated. And when things are isolated, you're not going to have the ability to make decisions for the business overall. You're just going to fix isolated issues. So whilst the data exists, it doesn't really flow, and it gets moved around. But in a lot of cases, it gets moved around by people. So it's still got that reliance on people to surface the data. And when you touched on fragmentation, do you know, I think that fragmentation hurts most in handoffs. So handoffs between clinics, labs, and groups. So anywhere that responsibility shifts from one person or organization to another is where fragmentation can hurt. And I'm going to use an example that you're familiar with, clinic to lab. Do you know, that's a big one. You've got scans in one place. You've got prescriptions in another place. You've got questions that are asked over email, status updates in portals. Do you know, at a group level, it shows up a lack of visibility because leaders don't see what's happening in real time. They tend to see it weeks later, if at all. And at a human level, it can show up in frustration. So people spend time managing information instead of delivering care. So I think that's where, for me, fragmentation can hurt. Without that, just linking that fragmentation back into connectivity. If the responsibility shift is seamless anyway, because everything is connected, it's going to be a better experience overall. So that clinic to lab one that I used, you know, should be an absolutely seamless process. And there shouldn't be worry that when responsibility shifts from one person or company, the process is going to fall down. Do you know, it should just happen. So for me, that's where I think fragmentation kind of comes into it. And then latterly, do you know, the tools that you can buy won't optimize outcomes. What they will do is optimize tasks. And I think a scanner, if you take a scanner as an example, can be world class at capturing data. World class. And there are scanners out there that are fantastic. A practice management system can be great at scheduling. And a lab system could be really powerful at production. But outcomes live between those tools, not in them. Do you know? So if they don't share context, what you get is local optimization. Yeah, and the way they describe it is local optimization and global inefficiency. Do you know, everyone's doing their job really, really well, and they're doing exactly what's expected of them and what they've been shown to do, but the overall experience is still clunky. Do you know? So for me, when you start to add software, you can run the risk of creating friction instead of value. And that's because software starts solving isolated problems without considering an overall or wider workflow. And every new system that gets added, you get another login, you get another process and another version of the truth. So, you know, you're solving that one isolated issue rather than looking at it overall and saying, how does the workflow need to operate for this to be connected and seamless? And at some point, people become the glue holding everything together, which flies in the face of, you know, digitalization and connected dentistry, etc. If you've got somebody copying and pasting data, or if you've got somebody re-entering data, following up, you know, that's the tipping point where software stops saving time and it actually does the opposite and starts consuming it. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, that did. And I think that's where, if you look at other industries as well, there are a lot of parallels that, it starts with tools and then it starts with workflows and then interconnectedness of different tools or softwares as well. But Andy, do you think, and I usually ask that question, and different people have different takes on this, that why dentistry is that a healthcare problem? Let me frame it that way. Is that a healthcare problem? Is that only dentistry within healthcare? Is that a problem only with dentistry? Or do you see that it's just that we are behind the curve in terms of catching up with other industries? Is that a case?
Yeah, really good question. And because we've got the other half of the business in Agilio is primary care. So we're the largest software provider in the primary care space, for that kind of middle office. So I can make a parallel because the MD of the primary care business and I talk a lot. Dentistry's a little bit more backward in where it is today in terms of connectivity and software being used as a workflow. So in primary care, because what they try and do is largely deploy software on like an ICB basis, but they're doing it with a more of an overarching collective view of how they want the individual GP practices to connect to each other. When you employ software, it's to employ software that drives workflow. And we're not there yet in dentistry. And I think that DSOs are pushing hard. DSOs specifically are pushing hard towards like integration and standardization, but there's still a long way to go. I do think that primary care is going to face a bit of a bump in the road because of what's happening with, from a governmental point of view and from a funding perspective. When a government changes, the model shifts and that can derail, everything. And if ICBs no longer exist and there's something else in its place, and then you've got to start again. We don't have that issue in dentistry. We're pretty robust from that point of view. But I think that the way that they've, in other sectors and industries approach it is just a little bit more advanced than we do in dentistry today. But that gives us opportunity. So I'm not saying that's all bad. I'm just saying there's still work to do. And I think that we've got every opportunity to learn from the mistakes of other industries that have done this before and really implement something that's quite special and will really drive what we're all here to do. No matter which side of the fence you sit on, we're all here to drive better patient outcomes. That's fundamentally why we're here. And if we're not, we shouldn't be here. And I say that a lot on webinars. If you wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and think, do you know what? I don't care about patient outcomes. You need to leave dentistry because we're meant to be a caregiving sector. But yeah, does that answer?
That does answer. And do you think, Andy, I'm just thinking that on the contrary side of things, right? Yeah, if you look at the income earners, the dentists and the associates, the amount of money that they earn, there are a lot of reports that says that it's in the top 2 or 3 professions in terms of earning capacity for associates. So if there's so much of money, it's, we talked about dental groups, we talked about private equity backed groups as well. So there's enough money, but still the change hasn't happened. Is it the nature of that the dentists are self-employed? But I assume in primary care and other healthcare, there is self-employment as a job category as well. So where do you see that kind of why dentistry has been that backward versus others like primary care as well?
So are you asking me whether dentists should be self-employed or not? Yeah. And, I think that whilst we're in an access challenged environment, having self-employed dentists is probably not a bad thing because, if the determination is to maximize their earning potential because they're not salaried, that means more patients are going to get seen. So I think that whilst we're in this kind of capacity challenge, self-employed dentists are probably right. But I don't want to be the bad guy in the room and say that they should or shouldn't be self-employed because there's pros and cons to each. There is. What I will say is other models of how to deliver dentistry will probably make us more efficient rather than salarying dentists and constraining them from an earnings point of view. And if you look around Europe where therapists are leading, a lot of dentistry now because they're still highly qualified, with clinician oversight instead of clinicians delivering that dentistry themselves, that changes things. So I'm going to answer it. You never want to be unpopular. I think newly qualified dentists should be salaried, and they cut the teeth, so to speak, in a salaried way. And because once they're salaried, they're governed. They're an employee. And I think that as long as the mentorship surrounds it to help them in those early years, of being a newly qualified dentist to experience what it's like actually delivering dentistry rather than learning how to deliver dentistry, that's great. And then after a period of time, if they want to then go off and be an associate on a self-employed nature, they should be allowed to. I know the government wouldn't like that because there's all sorts of tax implications in IR35, but something's got to shift, Nipun, is the answer. And whether it's the way that we deliver dentistry overall or the way that we employ or not our clinicians, is a debate that I'm hoping that I can be a part of over the next kind of period.
Brilliant. I think thanks for explaining that. It's a difficult question.
Okay.
I think it's always the nature of, so my wife is a dentist as well. She's a self-employed associate. So I know that there's a lot of upside, but then it creates a lot of noise in the system in terms of, kind of standardization of things as well. Thanks for answering that. Thanks for taking that question. Let's jump into the DSOs, or the dental groups as they call it. We were talking about a scaling dental group from 5 practices to 50 to, let's say, 500. Can you talk through what are the operational challenges that the tools or the softwares are solving when I'm a 5 clinic practice to when I'm a 50 versus 500? And I think you may have seen the spectrum of all those dental groups and what they usually come to you asking for. So I think just if you can paint that picture of what my problem is today, and if I'm a group, I'm looking at when I grow to 50, what additional workflows or system I should be thinking of. I think that would really help some people who are listening to this as well.
Yeah, so I'm really fortunate because I was sat on both sides of the fence. So I was the one asking whilst I was at Portman, on the operational side, and now being asked. So I'm very fortunate to have been able to experience this on both sides of the equation. And hopefully that means that when I'm giving counsel or guidance, it's grounded in somebody that understands operational pressure points, But the first thing that breaks in a scaling group is the informal coordination that I talked about earlier. So at 5 clinics, you rely on your experience, the relationships you've got, the workarounds that you do, because you're just trying to get stuff done. And at 50, those same behaviors the same behavior you had when you were a 5 practice group will then start to create inconsistency and risk. So what you start to see is variation in clinical processes, delays in labs, gaps in reporting, growing burnout. And that's all because the system depends too much on individuals instead of the workflow that needs to be created as you're a scaling group. And I think that, I would say that's the biggest thing that I've seen break in growing groups is that coordination of effort and how they're going to cope. And you see very, very harassed chief operating officers as an example, or, someone that's been promoted into a operations director role. And you can see the pain in their eyes sometimes. And that's because they're still reliant on processes that they developed when they were a lot smaller, that have just not evolved with the group around them, and reliant on individuals rather than systems or technology, to have that workflow in there. And DSOs don't pursue like integration and standardization because it's fashionable. They'd rather not, and they tell me all the time, we'd rather not spend this money, but we know that we have to. And they do it because the scale of them demands it. And that's fundamentally it. They have to have consistent workflows and shared data. And this has kind of advanced a lot over the last 3-4 years. The amount of DSOs that are investing in analytics and BI, rather than just getting, a report here and a report there to try and make an assumption of how the group is growing. They now want that connected view of the group, so they can use that to predict outcomes. And one thing I can say about private equity, having worked with private equity for the majority of my dental career, they love predictability. So if you can give data to your investors and shareholders that shows predictable outcomes, and that outcome could be plan revenue or compliance, risk or lab effectiveness, and efficiency, that's what private equity eats up every day. So integration becomes the only way that you can maintain quality and control costs. And what it does do is it reduces risk as the complexity increases. So we all know private equity doesn't tend to have businesses forever. They look to create efficiency, grow a group, and then they look to pass that on, make a profit, and somebody else comes along and adds their kind of perspective for the next segment out of there. So when you're looking to transact a business, even if you had a small group and you're looking to transact the group, if you've got unpredictable processes within your group, and you've not got the ability to reduce risk, you won't get the value that you think you're going to get, by just growing a group. And you can't do that anymore. You can't grow a group, put a bow around it and pass it off. People want to understand the risk element of it now as well. Risk can only be reduced when you are focused on integration and standardization of processes. So DSOs are accelerating a shift because of what they're looking to do now from a data and integrated viewpoint. But the entire industry is going to have to eventually make that same shift. The whole of dentistry is going to have to become more connected, more workflow focused. You even look at, if you look at the NHS side of dentistry in the UK, the data on contracts, clawbacks, all of that stuff is so sporadic right now. It's really hard to kind of grab it by the throat and understand whether you're doing well and if there's efficiencies to be made. And that creates, risk. So that's the one thing I would say. But then, you asked about connectivity and connected dentistry, and what does connected dentistry actually mean? So if we just kind of unpick that side of it, because I think it's relevant to the question that you asked, Nipun. So connected dentistry to me means that shared data, shared workflows, and shared accountability, because that's what data and workflows will give, accountability, and the accountability should be shared. So information should be entered once and once only, and then used everywhere it's needed. Tasks move forward organically without manual chasing, and everyone's involved in that as well. So, clinics, labs, leadership, working from the same version of the truth, rather than multiple versions of the truth. So multiple Bibles, of what is going on. We need one. And it's not about one system replacing everything. So as much as I'm in the business of selling software, I'm not saying today that you should only use one system and that should be Agilio, and that will replace everything you've got. It's not that. Like I said before, we don't want to be a PMS provider. We don't want to be an ERP, and we don't want to be, there's lots of stuff we don't want to be, because what we want to do is do our thing really, really well. But then what we want to do is we want to connect. So we want systems that connect together, so there's one experience. And if that means that that we work with another provider who's doing one part of the workflow, because that's not where our focus is, that's great. We should be connected to them, And I think for me, that's really what connected dentistry really means. So it's not one solution that's going to solve all your problems. I actually think if you get one solution that says it's going to solve all your problems, you're going to find more problems than you think. I actually think that you need to have partners and solutions that are expert in the kind of field. Not a we can do everything for you.
One of the problems that we face is, again, the nature of, when it comes to dental groups, it's easier because they can set the standards which the associates have to follow because they're part of that corporate. But when it comes to independent dentists, which is where 80% of clinics in UK would be, mostly independent or smaller dental groups, that's where applying those standards and shared accountability becomes a challenge. And then if we top it up with the labs, and again, that's a minefield in itself, because every dentist has their own contract or pricing negotiation because they met them at a trade fair, a dental event. So it creates that complexity. What is your view? Because I think we have done a lot when it comes to dental groups, when it comes to PMS systems connected, scanners being connected, but when it comes to the lab side, which is personally from our side as well, and I think that could be a reason why it's so complex and no one else has done it. So just try to get your thoughts on do you think about this on a daily basis of how to connect the missing pieces?
Yeah, and I've got experience of it. So when I worked at Henry Schein, we tried to create that connected lab experience to practices and sell that solution. It didn't always go well because you need labs to adopt it as much as you do clinics and groups. And I think that's the challenge there. Some want to either have closed source integrated, or or not be integrated at all and still stay quite analog. So it's widely varied. And we both know a guy, Tony Rudden, which I hope is watching this podcast today. He told me the single biggest challenge that he could see after he and Garen, and the team developed Carrigan, was the lab side, and we're still not there. So we've still got a lot of work to do to integrate the labs from an associate pay point of view. That is still a pain point of mine, and one hopefully that we can work with people like yourselves and answer that sooner rather than later. Because as a group grows and we're talking about scale, and you've got self-employed associates that are maximizing their income and their take-home pay, small mistakes like lab deductions can have a detrimental impact on whether an associate stays within your group or not. And if that associate doesn't, and they go because they don't believe that you are invested enough in the systems to pay them what they're due, you're then going to have a capacity issue. So I don't know whether this has answered your question, but from a lab perspective, I still think that is probably a little bit of a minefield. And I'm seeing great solutions come into market, but it's still got a little while to go. And what we want to do is be, because it's not our primary focus. It's not something that we're going to get to anytime soon. So we need to work with people, their expertise in it, work on that partnership basis and be connected to
term. If you were to, let's say, mentor a 5-clinic associate who's operating and the owner, and then a 50-clinic owner, group owner versus a 500, what would be your piece of advice to the leader from the leadership side of things in terms of how we can bring about that change together, and what they need to think differently to bring that change of accountability within dentistry?
Yeah, so I it starts with mindset, and the mindset shift that leaders need to go through to kind of move beyond silo thinking. So leaders need to kind of stop thinking in terms of departments and start thinking in terms of journeys. And every part of dentistry has got a journey rather than the department. So you touched on lab. Lab is a journey. It's not a one part of a function. It is a journey, and so it's not. They should be asking questions like not how does this tool perform, but instead asking how does it actually move from start to finish. And that means measuring success by outcomes and not features, and recognizing that workflow design is a leadership responsibility, not an IT one. IT are there to implement it, but they're not there to design it, because no disrespect to IT people, they're not operationally focused in the same way. So the workflows that need to be adopted as leaders scale should be around that journey one. And you asked about connected dentistry, and so excellence only compounds when it connects. And I think disconnected excellence can look impressive if you look at it in isolation, but it still relies heavily on people compensating for system gaps. And I think connected dentistry reduces friction, improves consistency, and frees people to focus on care instead of coordination. And kind of closing thought on it, disconnected excellence is impressive, but connected excellence is transformative. And I think that, that's the kind of advice I would give. If you think in those terms, you're going to build an outstanding group. When you come to realize the value of that asset, which a lot of us are here, to do, if you can show that you've got connected excellence running through your business as workflows, you're gonna get a higher value for that business at the end of the day.
Right. Thanks, Andy, for explaining this. Thanks for being generous with your time and all the discussions that we have had to date, and today's, agreeing to do this podcast with me. Before I let you go, I'll put you on a spot on a question. So I've been watching a lot of podcasts to get inspiration, and I think everyone knows Diary of a CEO. So I've taken a question from there. Is when we leave a podcast episode, we'll ask a question for the next guest. So if we don't know who that guest is, I know, but I think it's someone from lab. But let's say if you were to ask a question and leave a question for the next guest on this podcast, what that question would be.
Okay. Yeah, that's put me on the spot. So I'll use the theme that I was just talking about, connected excellence. So from a lab point of view, what one thing could be done to deliver connected excellence into dentistry? I think that will probably put them on the spot, which is fine. But it would be really interesting to understand it from that side, because I'm looking at it from my view. So I'm looking at it from the outside in.
Brilliant. I will surely ask that question, Andy.
I'll be watching the podcast.
Thanks again, Andy, for being generous with your time and answering all the questions very honestly as well. And I think your view and kind of the way you have mentored different companies and different people in the industry has been transformational. I look forward to seeing you this year in person as well. But yeah, just wanted to thank you for everything to date.
No, brilliant. And thanks for inviting me on, Nipun. I've really enjoyed the discussion.
Great. Thanks.
See you soon.
All right.